anything you want to do with your time. You want to play video games, you want to watch television, whatever you want to do, it doesn't matter. We should stop moralizing and medicalizing this stuff and saying, look, whatever you want to do is traction as long as it's done with intent, as long as it's done with forethought. That's traction. You'll notice that the word distraction ends in the same 6 letters, ACTION, which spells action. This is what people tend to blame when they get distracted. They say, oh, I was going to work on that big project, but then my phone rang, or I got an email, or my kids interrupted me, right? We tend to blame the things outside of us. However, studies find that is only 10% of the time that we get distracted. 10%, okay? It is a source of distraction, but it's only 10% of the cause. So what's the other 90%?
Nir, thank you so much for joining me for the podcast today. I've been super looking forward to this. Tell me, how are you? How's it going?
I'm doing really well. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, what was fascinating is I came across your book, Indestructible, and that was just a massive game changer for me. I love books. I've written 20 books myself, but I'm always looking for information that is inspirational, but just kind of based on something which actually makes a difference. And the whole traction thing, when I understood what that was and where that word came from, that just blew my mind. I thought, wow, this makes so much sense. Why doesn't everybody know about this? The opposite of you say distraction, people often think of it's focus. No, it's traction. So please just tell me first off, how did you come across that yourself, that Latin word?
Well, if we weren't separated by thousands of miles, I would give you a huge hug, because that is actually what is most meaningful to me as an author. So I'm not an academic. I didn't do the research in the book. There's 30 pages of citations to peer-reviewed studies. My goal with the book was to dive into this deeper truth around why we get distracted in the first place, because I think that becoming indistractable is truly the skill of the century, right? There's no area of your life that's not affected by your ability to sustain your attention. It is truly how we choose our life. But there was just so much rubbish out there about why we go off track. People blaming Facebook and Twitter and television and all the things outside of us. And nobody was looking at the root cause of the problem. Nobody was actually saying, well, what does the literature out there actually say? What does the psychology studies say? And it turns out that the truth is much more interesting, I think. So my job was to take the thousands of research studies that I read, which are a slog. They are not fun. It took me 5 years to write this book because I read countless academic research studies. Many of them are, written so that nobody ever reads them. They're read by, a few PhD advisors, and that's about it. And it was in that process that my goal was to explain what I was learning in a way that would be practical. Right. So I didn't want some, academic book that you read and say, okay, that's nice, but I can't do anything with this. I wanted it to be extremely actionable because I was writing the book for me. I was getting distracted. I needed a solution. So one of the things that really gave me a light bulb moment was to start at first principles. All right. I'm a big fan of Richard Feynman, and he always talked about first principles. And so I just started with the word. What does this word distraction mean? What is that all about? And it's one of those words that we all think we understand, but when you poke and prod, you realize, wait a minute, maybe I didn't understand. So I started with, where does the word come from? And the word comes from this Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. And you'll notice that the word distraction ends in the same 6 letters, ACTION, which spells action. So reminding us that distraction is not something that happens to us. It is an action that we take. So the opposite of distraction, if you ask most people, if you really want to see if they know the meaning of a word, ask them the antonym. What's the opposite of distraction? Most people will tell you it's focus. That's not true. The opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction and distraction. So traction, by definition, is any action, shares the same common Latin root of trahare. It's any action that pulls you towards what you said you were going to do, things that you do with intent, things that you do with forethought that move you closer to your values and help you become the kind of person you want to become. The opposite of traction, of course, distraction. Distraction is any action that takes you away from what you plan to do, further away from your values, further away from becoming the kind of person you want to become. So this is really important because I think it helps us distinguish between traction and distraction for the first time without moralizing and medicalizing, right? I would argue anything you want to do with your time. You want to play video games, you want to watch television, whatever you want to do, it doesn't matter. We should stop moralizing and medicalizing this stuff and saying, look, whatever you want to do is traction as long as it's done with intent, as long as it's done with forethought. That's traction. Conversely, anything that takes you away from what you plan to do is distraction. So now we can start talking intelligently about the difference between traction and distraction so that we can make sure we do what we say we're going to do in life.
I mean, there's so many, all the hairs, and believe you me, I've got a lot of hairs on my back. They're all just standing up on end. I figure all the hair I once had on my head is all gone south and it's coming out my ears and my back. It was all just literally standing on end for so many of the things you said. One of the first things you said about, the truth. The truth is really what's going on. The truth of being a human being. What is that experience like? And I love the podcast you did with Lewis Howes because you put him on the spot. You're like, hang on a second, let's talk about you. And I really love that because you made him look at what he was doing. And you made me look at what I was doing. That was the real key thing for me with the book Indestructible. I just really put a spotlight on myself. And then I just saw it. Look, you're only either going one way. You're going one way. It's your choice. Are you moving forwards or are you going back? Everyone talks about that, right? Do you have traction or do you have distraction? And then what I loved, what you said, which has also been a big liberation for me, is that if I'm going to do something like scroll on the internet or watch something, enjoy it. Don't see that as something that is, oh, I'm distracting myself from something. But I suppose one of the things I really wanted to ask you is, you talk, again, you kind of confirm lots of things I almost wanted to be confirmed because I can't find too many people who are singing from the same hymn sheet as I am. And that's why it's been really helpful. And you don't know this, but you actually inspired me to create an app. We created an app. I basically created it. I decided to create it after finishing the book Indestructible. But I mean, look, and then I didn't even know, I'm sorry, I didn't know about some of the work that you actually did because I didn't dive into the work that you're doing now, which would be great to talk about. But guys, all of you that listen to this, go and buy both of the books. My recommendation would be Indestructible or Hooked, because especially if you're into understanding what is going on within you and what is stopping you. So I want to ask you two questions about this. One of them is quite deep. So maybe I'll ask you that question second. But the first question I wanted to ask you is, and you talk a lot about this, about pain that people are in that causes them to get distracted. And I love when you talk about smoking, about why people smoke. But just talk to us a little bit about what you found out about the type of pain people experience that would then make them want to get distracted away from their pain.
Right. So, the mental image you should have in your head when you're thinking about distraction is that the opposite of distraction is traction. So you can think of two arrows pointing to the left and to the right, traction and distraction. Okay. Now we have to ask ourselves what moves us towards traction and distraction. So you can picture two arrows pointing to the center of that number line. And here we have our triggers. We have two kinds of triggers. We have external triggers. These are the usual suspects, right? The pings, the dings, the rings, anything in our outside environment that can lead us towards traction or distraction. This is what people tend to blame when they get distracted. They say, oh, I was going to work on that big project, but then my phone rang, or I got an email, or my kids interrupted me, right? We tend to blame the things outside of us. However, studies find that is only 10% of the time that we get distracted. 10%. Okay. It is a source of distraction, but it's only 10% of the cause. So what's the other 90%? The other 90% of the time that we get distracted, we don't get distracted because of what's happening outside of us, but rather we get distracted because of what's happening inside of us. These are called internal triggers. What are internal triggers? Loneliness, boredom, fatigue, stress, anxiety, uncertainty. These are the emotional triggers that lead to 90% of our distractions.
And that's why, again, when you get to the truth, it's like, look, forget time management. And I love all of the stuff you say about to-do lists. Let's just have a proper conversation, right? How do you feel about where you are right now? What is the experience like of being you? In fact, I found this out years ago, that the origins of how are you are actually biblical. I mean, how are you with God? And not that we're going to have a conversation about God, but for me, it's like, how are you with yourself? And to acknowledge the fact that, like you said, that you might be feeling stuck, lonely, depressed. That's the place to start off with. But why do you think very few people actually want to address the real nitty gritty?
Because there's so much comfort in blaming the thing that is distracting you. But of course, the truth is, whether it's too much news, too much booze, too much food, too much Facebook, too much football, you will always find something to distract you if you don't know the root cause of the distraction. So it's not until we acknowledge this incredibly important fact that time management is pain management. And I would also add to that, weight management is pain management. Money management is pain management. Everything you do for only one reason. We used to think that the seat of human motivation was about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain.
Yeah.
Okay. Freud said this. Jeremy Bentham said this.
Tony Robbins said it.
Tony Robbins said it. It's not true. Neurologically speaking, it's not true. In fact, everything you do for only one reason. It's not about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. Everything you do is about the desire to escape discomfort.
Yeah.
Everything you do. And so once you realize that fact, right? If you don't believe me, this is called the homeostatic response, right? So if you go outside and it's cold, the brain says, oh, this is uncomfortable, you should put on a jacket. If you walk back in and it's too hot, the brain says you should take your coat off. If you are hungry, you feel hunger pangs, so you eat. And if you're too stuffed, you ate too much, the brain says, oh, that's not comfortable, stop eating. So those are homeostatic responses, right? Physical discomfort. But the same goes for our psychological discomfort. So when you're lonely, check Facebook. When you're uncertain, Google. When you're bored, oh, lots of solutions to boredom, right? We can watch sports. We can look at stock prices. We can check the news so we can worry about somebody's problems thousands of miles away, as opposed to having to think about what's going on in our own life. Yeah. So once you understand this lens, that every action you take is because of a desire to escape discomfort. Even, I know somebody out there saying, well, what about the pursuit of pleasure, right? Aren't I motivated by the
to get out of pain?
Yeah. Exactly. Even the desire to feel good is psychologically destabilizing. Wanting, craving, desire, lusting. There's a reason we say love hurts. Neurologically speaking, that is exactly how the reward system works. It creates this itch that we seek to scratch. So everything you do, managing your behavior, is fundamentally about managing discomfort.
So, actually, you know what? I had one of those. I had that voice in my head thinking, I hope we're recording, because we're recording this on multiple cameras. But I just had that voice in my head going, I hope we're recording on here. And I'm so glad that we are. I can hear that, the pain in my body of going, I hope this isn't happening. There's so much I want to say and ask you. I love what you say about happiness as well, right? I love that because I think it's so important. In 2003, we designed an equation for happiness, and it got broadcast in 27 countries around the world. It was a publicity stunt for a holiday company. But I even remember back then thinking, what is the point of life? Is life all about happiness? And I thought, no. Life isn't about being happy all the time. Well, surely we're not designed, but to be happy all the time. And I put that thought to the back of my mind. And then when I heard what you said about that, I just thought, oh my God, that's exactly right. Can you explain that in terms of how you see how human beings, what are we wired up to actually to do?
Yeah. I would argue that we're not designed to be happy for very long. That in fact, the brain doesn't do what feels good. The brain does what felt good. So the way the brain gets us to do things is to create an association, a memory of what felt good in the past so that we desire it again in the future. Mm-hmm. So the brain gets us to do what felt good. It's the memory of what felt good. So happiness is designed to be fleeting. Think about this for a minute. Let's say there was a group of Homo sapiens who had a special gene that made them always happy. They were always content. They never wanted more in life. They just were perfectly zen. What would happen if a group of our ancestors without that gene, without that perpetual bliss gene, met these people? I'll tell you what would happen to them. They would kill and eat them. That's what would happen to them. Because having a satisfied species, a satisfied race that you're perpetually happy all the time is not evolutionarily beneficial. So I argue we are designed to be perpetually perturbed, right? That evolution has given us this gift of dissatisfaction. So as opposed to saying, oh, that's a bummer, I can never be always happy. No. The idea is stop putting so much pressure on yourself to always be happy. Why is that the bar? Something that's temporary. It's like thinking that sex should be a constant orgasm. No, it's meant by design. It is fleeting. And successful people, high performers, they use this discomfort right? They lean into it. They don't, what most people do, low performers, every time they feel bored, lonely, sad, uncertain, fearful, stressed, they escape it. They take a drink, they scroll a feed, they turn on the TV, they look for escape with distraction. High performers, they take that discomfort and they use it like rocket fuel. They use it to push them forward, right? So that discomfort makes them want more, makes them want to do better, makes them want to create, invent, contribute to the world. So I would argue that if we know how to harness those internal triggers, it can actually help us get to our goals. It can help us make the world better.
Yeah, Bob Proctor passed away a few days ago, and he said some amazing things. And one of the things he said is about being satisfied. He goes, I'm never satisfied, because if I'm satisfied, I will then become comfortable. And if I become comfortable, then it's so easy just to give in to temptation. And again, there's so much I could ask you about. There's Hal Hershfield, who you've probably come across, who's a researcher. He talks a lot about the science of future thinking, future self. And he said something which I found really fascinating about how we were also designed not to think about retirement. We were just designed to literally survive. So most people's relationship to their future doesn't go very far. We know who we're going to be tonight, or tomorrow, or next week, or next month. But beyond that, for most people, and then there's a clinical psychologist called Meg Jay, who talks about the empathy gap. She said, you can't have empathy for someone that you don't know. And this is where, for me, it starts getting really interesting, because again, I've heard you talk about, and I love this because there is some great real research that shows thinking about the future and fantasizing about it is a complete waste of time. In fact, it can be even more harmful. I like the idea, and I'd love to hear what you have to think, again, around our ability to see a future beyond where we are that then would inspire us to go, I want to do that, and I want to go through all of these obstacles to actually get there. I'd love to hear what you have to say, but also I would love to hear, Nir, about where you see all of this going for you in your vision and your mission of what you're doing, right now, and how we can actually help you with this. So, feel free just to say whatever you want.
Yeah. So there's a lot there to unpack. I think the most helpful place to start is to understand the strategy to become indistractable. First of all, let's acknowledge that this is the most important skill of the century, that the world is only going to become a more distracting place. So we have to become indistractable if we want to have the kind of lives that aren't lived with regret. I mean, this is really why I do what I do. I don't want to regret how I spent my days, right? And I don't want others to regret how they spend their days either. And the only way to do that is to be indistractable. To become indistractable means that you are as honest with yourself as you are with others. Because today, we all know what to do. There is no shortage of information, right? Does anybody not know that to get in shape, you have to eat right and exercise? Do we really need another book to tell us that? We know. Does anybody not know that to have good relationships with people, we have to be fully present with them? Does anybody not know that if you want to accrue wealth, you have to make more and spend less? We know this. Does anybody need a refresher? If you don't know any of this stuff, Google it. This is the first time in history where all the how-tos are accessible at your fingertips on your phone. The problem is that it's not that we don't know what to do. It's that we don't do the things we know we should.
Yeah.
It's that we don't follow through. That's the challenge of our time. And the reason we don't follow through, and by the way, interestingly enough, this is the same question that Plato asked 2,500 years ago. Yeah. The Greek philosopher Plato, 2,500 years ago, he called it akrasia in the Greek, the tendency to do things against our better interest. So we have always struggled with this. It's not a problem caused by technology. It's something about our species that we take the short road, we take the easy path, and we look towards distraction. And unfortunately, when we do that, we look back and regret, and we say, why didn't I read enough? Why didn't I exercise enough? Why didn't I spend enough time with my kids? Why didn't I work on that project? Why didn't I start that business? Why didn't I do that side hustle? And we look back and we didn't live the kind of life we know we could have lived. And that, there's I can't remember who said it, but that somebody once said that, that hell is realizing the kind of life you could have had. Right. And that's the mission I'm on. I want people to live the kind of life they want to live, which, by the way, if I want to play video games all day, right? If that's if that's consistent with your values, awesome. You should do that. So we need to stop moralizing and saying, oh, the way you spend your time is bad, but the way I spend my time, oh, that's okay. No, anything you want to do with your time, as long as it's done with intent, with forethought, is traction. Anything else is distraction. So These are the 4 strategies, right? A lot of people get into tactics. Oh, turn off your notifications, blah, blah, blah. That's cheap. Okay. Yeah. Anybody can do that. I want to teach you the strategies. The tactics are what you do. Strategy is why you do it. So the 4 big strategies that I want everybody to take away who's listening to me today, I want you to remember these 4 strategies. Number 1, the first step is to master the internal triggers. That if you don't master your internal triggers, they become your master. And so there's dozens of different techniques I talk about in the book about how you can do this. Anybody can use these techniques. So that's the first step. That's the most important step. The second step is to make time for traction. That, oftentimes I've worked with people over the years, and I used to do this too, who have an empty calendar. Right? An empty day. And they say, oh, I'm going to accomplish all this stuff on my to-do list. I've got a full day ready. And the fact is, those are our least productive days, because if you don't plan your day, somebody's going to plan it for you, right? There are too many interests out there, the media, your boss, your kids, your customers, who want your time and attention. If you don't plan your day, somebody's going to plan it for you. And you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. Let me say this again. You can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. So you have got to plan your time. If you don't do this, and this is not something that I invented, this has been around for decades. In fact, there are thousands of peer-reviewed studies that show this technique called making an implementation intention, which is just a fancy way of saying planning out what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. This is no longer optional. Okay. Maybe children and retirees don't have to do this, but if you want the kind of life you're proud of, if you want to look back and not have regrets, you must plan your day. And I teach you exactly how to do this. It's pretty darn easy. You do it according to your values. So we can talk about that in a minute. The third step is to hack back those external triggers. So this is where we dive into that 10% of distraction that comes from our outside environment. We hack back our phones, our email. That's the simple stuff. What about the more complicated stuff like meetings? How many of us spend time in boring, distracting meetings that didn't need to be called, especially now that so many of us are working from home? How do we hack back meetings? What about our kids? If you're working from home, well, we love them to death, but our kids can be a huge distraction. What do we do about that? So I show you systematically, one by one, how to go through each and every one of these distractions. The last step is to prevent distraction with pacts. And so this is the last line of defense. This is the firewall against distraction, where we make what's called a pre-commitment to make sure that if everything else fails, there's a barrier to that distraction. And it's when we use these 4 strategies in concert, this is how we become indistractable.
I cannot recommend highly enough people just listening back to what you just heard and getting the book. I'm 52 this year, right? So I've spent 32 years of my life as a coach, working in the field of psychology. And what you've just said there is what everybody needs to know. And maybe it's not for everyone, but this is what I also wanted to ask you. There was a guy who won the Nobel Prize in 1937. He was a Hungarian guy, and his theory was basically something called Syntropy. I knew nothing what this thing was, and then I delved into it. And his idea was basically saying everything lives for one reason, only one reason. It lives to grow and express and expand. Everything. Whether it does or whether it doesn't, who knows? But when it comes to art, first off, do you think that? Do you think that's why the point of life, life for it to express, to grow, to advance?
Right. So I think this is, I'm not sure if he won the Nobel Prize, but it sounds like what Schroeder said around that the goal of life is to fight entropy, that's what defines life, is the resistance against chaos.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because then I'm obviously thinking of someone like Viktor Frankl, who's in a prisoner of war in Auschwitz, and finding meaning in the experience and finding the ability to overcome the challenge of where he actually is. And as you said, we live in a world right now there's too much information. And I think the guy who won the Nobel Prize in 1971, I think he said the biggest problem in the world is basically there's too much information. Maslow said in 1966, our television was a destructive influence on children. It's like all of this is there. And I think now is the time, probably more than ever, we need to become aware of what is our what's the word I'm looking for? Is being sold to the highest. Our attention is being sold to the highest bidder. We know this. I heard you talk about the Facebook blower, but in your mission right now, so tell me, I'd love you to tell me, where do you see this all panning out for you? Tell me about, like, in 5 years' time, How do you see this all evolving for you? You know, people reading more of your books, people getting engaged more with the work that you're doing. And I know this is only one aspect of what you do, but where do you want to see this all go? And how can we all help you? Apart from, you know, buying your books, what can we do?
Well, it's okay. So I'll tell you the story behind the title. So the reason the book is called Indestructible, it's a made up word. I made it up, right? It's a new word. So Indestructible is meant to sound like indestructible. It's meant to sound like a superpower. It's meant to sound like an identity, because I came across this fascinating research around the psychology of religion that showed that when someone has a moniker, when you have an identity, when there's some kind of noun you can call yourself, you become much more likely to conform to the values of that identity. So when someone calls themselves a devout Muslim, or a member of a particular political party, a Democrat or whatever, or even if somebody says that they're a vegetarian, that is an identity. Yeah. Right. And so just like a vegetarian doesn't wake up in the morning and say, should I have a bacon sandwich for breakfast? No, it's who they are. Right. They don't do that. They don't eat meat. It is part of their identity. So everyone listening to me, you don't have to read the book. You can become indestructible. You can proclaim yourself to be the kind of person who does what they say they're going to do.
Surely, sorry to interrupt you. Surely that has to be one of our greatest ever achievements. I mean, maybe it's just me that thinks that, but I'd like to think that the majority of people in the world would like to be able to say, I'm indestructible. You can't distract me. I know what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing. Get out of my way. Do you not think that that's what most people deep down perhaps want?
And that's what I want to enable. When you ask me, what's my mission? What's my goal here? My goal is to liberate people from being distractible. And let me define what that term means. So it doesn't mean being indestructible doesn't mean you never get distracted. I made up the word so I can define it. So being indestructible doesn't mean that you never get distracted. It means you know why you got distracted and you do something to prevent it happening again. So Paulo Coelho had a wonderful quote. He said, "A mistake repeated more than once is a decision. A mistake repeated more than once is a decision." So distractible people keep getting distracted by the same things. How many times can we complain about Instagram? How many times can we complain about our kids distracting us? How many times can we complain about the phone, the email, the drinks, whatever, before we say enough, right? Yeah. You are deciding to be distractible unless you become indestructible. An indestructible person says, okay, I see what happened to me there, right? I understand why I got distracted. And now I know what to do about it. Because every distraction only has three causes: an internal trigger, an external trigger, or a planning problem. That's it. And once you break down the problem, you can take steps today to prevent getting distracted tomorrow. So my goal is to liberate people from this victim mentality that this is being done to them. Yeah. Who doesn't know that the way the media makes money is selling your attention? Does anybody not know that the BBC and the New York Times and the Guardian and the Facebook and everybody in the media business makes money by selling your attention? That's not unethical. There's nothing wrong about that, right? Yeah. Unless you let them do it to you. So if you want to watch television or read the news, great. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't let them suck you in a way that it leads towards distraction. Do it as traction. You can turn distraction into traction by becoming indestructible.
And that's another thing that I love about you, the fact that you're helping companies develop the technology around being hooked, but not being addicted. In fact, Louis, could you pass me a copy of Inspirators? I just want to show, and you might want to stop the camera on the phone for a second, just in case the battery runs out. Because you came up with a word, and I came up with a word as well. I think it's down there, Louis, the bottom down there. I came up with a word called Inspirators. So this was the second to last book I wrote. It's called Inspirators. So I don't actually know whether that's a word, but it's about, people who decide to breathe life into, the future that they see in front of them. But in terms of how we can help you with that, is the best way for people that are listening to this, is it for them to, I know that you've got a free course. Is it for them to buy your books? What is the best way for people to kind of get into your thought leadership and also, your blogs as well?
I appreciate it. Yeah, so of course, visit the blog. I blog at nirandfar.com. But the most important thing you can do is to start thinking of yourself as indestructible and tell others that you're indestructible. Because here's the thing. When you tell others, right, there's a reason that every religion has not every religion, that all the major religions have an element of a proselytizing. Why is that? Why does every religion have missionaries? Every major religion have missionaries? Because it's not just about converting new people to the flock. It's more so about reinforcing the faith of the person doing the proselytizing. So by calling yourself Indestructible, it's okay. You don't need to read the book. If you're listening to the sound of my voice
I'll read the book.
I appreciate it. You don't even need to do that. By calling yourself Indestructible, you are not only holding yourself accountable, you're not only more likely to be indestructible yourself, you're sharing what I think is an absolutely necessary, what we call a social antibody, right? That we have what we call social antibodies when we see in society that there is an antisocial behavior, something that harms people. We adapt and we adopt. Okay, we adapt our behaviors. We adopt these social antibodies so that we can spread better ways of doing things, better manners, better norms of doing things, so that we reduce this social harm. And we adopt new technologies that fix the last generation of technology. And the good news is we've been here before. So I remember in the 1980s, so I was born in the 70s, but I remember the 80s. And I remember in the mid 80s, we had ashtrays in my house. Now, my parents didn't smoke, but I'm telling you, your younger audience members won't believe this, but there was a time and place where, back in the 1980s, people would walk into each other's homes and expect to smoke a cigarette. There were, if you didn't have ashtrays, people collected ashtrays, they displayed them. Everybody had ashtrays. Can you imagine what would happen if someone walked into your house today and lit up a cigarette? That'd be crazy, right? You'd kick them out. That would never happen today. Well, what changed? Was there a law that says you can't smoke in someone's private residence? No, there's never been such a law. What changed is that we adopted these social antibodies. We adopted a new identity. I remember when my mother threw away the ashtrays and someone came over and expected to smoke. And my mother told her, "Oh, I'm so sorry. We are non-smokers." You see that identity, right? That's who we are. We are non-smokers. Yeah. If you'd like to smoke, you can kindly go outside. And at first, this woman was shocked. "Oh, you're going to ask me to go outside to smoke?" Of course, today, this is common, right? It's rude to even assume you could smoke in someone's house today, right? Well,
we have to even ask if you can smoke outside.
Yeah, also true, right? So this is what we need to do with Indestructible. If you're asking me, how can we help? Join this cause. Tell people you're Indestructible. You know what? I'm sorry. I don't respond to every text message in 30 seconds. I'm Indestructible. Yeah, I make a schedule for myself and I stick to it because I'm Indestructible, right? Is this any more unusual? Is this any more uncomfortable than telling someone to go smoke outside, or someone who has a unique diet like a vegetarian, or someone who wears a religious garb like a hijab if they're Muslim, right? There's nothing particularly outrageous about this. We just need people to have the courage to say, I am Indestructible, which doesn't necessarily mean you don't like technology. I love technology. Yeah. I use Instagram and Facebook and email. I love technology, but I use it on my schedule and according to my values.
On your terms.
Exactly. Because
I love what you say about, getting in the game. And it's not about finishing something. It's just about, look, this is my window. This is like, whatever, it's 20 minutes, half an hour. Just do what you say you're going to do, because we know that the brain remembers everything that we say. And if you get into the game, like you said about, you're lying to yourself. Let's stop lying and let's face the truth of who we are and what we can actually do with what we have.
And hold others accountable. I think that a lot. I one of the things that kills me these days is when I go to a restaurant. Oh, every restaurant I go to, I see this. I'll see a family of people, parents and children, and the parents will stuff iPads in front of their kids' faces or phones in front of their kids' faces just to shut them up. Yeah. This is a big mistake, people, right? We got to stop doing that. We have to understand that iPads are not iNannies. Okay. That's not what they were designed to do. And so we have to make sure that we teach our kids how to also manage their discomfort. Is it okay that it's a little bored before the food gets here? Yeah. That's life. Yeah. Right. Let's have a conversation. Let's draw together. Let's do something. Let's tell jokes. Let's do something to pass the time that doesn't require us to space out into an app. So we have to be very conscious, not only for ourselves. And again, I'm not anti-tech. I'm anti the misuse of tech, but that's on us. That's not the tech company's fault.
I've got a challenge for everyone who's listening to this to do some sort of a pose. Do a story, tag Nir in it, and just basically saying, I'm Indestructible. Yes. So let's see how many people do something on the back of this. Let's create more of a movement, because look, I think also in life, there's so many people you can follow. I think the greatest person to follow personally is the person that you choose to actually be. You know, I love what you said about identity. You gave me another perspective of that, which I didn't know. For me, the word identity means, you know, who you think you are. You've probably heard Dr. Joe, not Dr. Joe Dispenza. He talks about, you know, the possibilities that exist. But the guy, and I know you talk a lot about willpower, about the fact that the misconceptions about that.
Yeah.
But the reality of trying to create a new personal reality with the same personality. If you decide to become Indestructible, it's not about, I would say that's not about being perfect, but that's a decision that you're making. And I want to share with you the impact that you had on me, you know, and I love what you say about labels. So I was diagnosed with dyslexia and attention deficit disorder. I don't really talk about it. I don't use that anymore as like I have an excuse. I know I've got a very active mind, so my mind can go all over the place, but I've had to work really hard to take my attention and focus it. But when from reading your book, it just made me really think about that traction. It's like every time I'm being distracted, what am I stopping myself from doing what I really, really want to do?
Right.
So in 2020, my mum was diagnosed with lung cancer. She wasn't given, never smoked. I thought, you know what, I've got to do something. So I created a program which is free, and it's all about developing a relationship to your future self. And we had 8,000 people sign up to this program, but we only had 2.8% of people complete it. Absolutely free. And the people that completed it, it was like game changing. So again, I was thinking, hang on a second, what do we have to do to help all these people? And at that time, I was reading your book. And then I thought, how can I gamify this experience? And what we've done, and I'm happy to share this with you, we created like an app where we help you identify a little bit of who the person you want to be. And then it's about starting something and stopping something, just one. And every time you do the start and the stop, you get a coin, right? So you're building what some people might call identity capital. You're seeing, and look, this has only been out a few weeks, but the people that are using it, you know, it's becoming something where even myself, there's been a few times I wouldn't have done the thing, but now I'm kind of recording, and I know you talk about, you know, the tracking as well. But I'm definitely going to show that to you. I'd love for you to look at it. But tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing now, because when I started to pay attention to that, I just thought, okay, this is really interesting. Yeah. So tell us about the work that you're doing now in terms of technology and getting people hooked.
Yeah, so we can use this technology. You know, I wrote the book on how these companies get you hooked, and the idea was that we can steal their secrets, right? That it shouldn't just be Facebook and Instagram and the video game companies that get us hooked. We can steal these techniques to make, you know, apps like yours that improve people's lives, something that they do engage with, but they can't benefit from it unless they use it. So I've worked with thousands of companies in from healthcare to educational products, right? Apps that teach you a new language or help kids with their studies, financial services products that get people into the habit of saving money by getting them hooked to an app that facilitates that. So there's all kinds of ways. I mean, that's really the focus of my work. I've never worked for social media companies. The book wasn't written for them. They know this stuff well before I published it. My goal was to get these secrets out so that the rest of us can use them for good. So that's what Hooked is all about, how to build habit-forming products, to build healthy habits in people's lives. And of course, we have to do that ethically. And then Indestructible is about how do we break the bad habits, right? So it's for different products. Hooked is for building health tech, ed tech, fintech products that improve lives through healthy habits. And Indestructible is about how do we break those bad habits.
So let me ask you one more question. And guys, honestly, please follow Nir. Go and check out what he's got on the table for you that you can learn to become Indestructible. What a great thing to strive towards, that you decide where your attention goes to. But let me ask you, just in terms of personal development, obviously it's a big market. Why do you think so many people struggle to, you know, if they buy the book, to finish the book, you know, they do a course? Why do you think to lose weight? Why do you think that happens?
I'll tell you why. Because most people prioritize intensity over consistency. And one of my life mantras is the opposite: consistency over intensity. That buying the book, or listening to the course, or starting something is super easy, right? We're in February here, so last month everybody made New Year's resolutions, and of course we know the gym membership spikes. Everybody goes to work out for like a few weeks, and they're really intense. We see these weekend warriors that come in and they sweat, they leave puddles of sweat behind them. They work real hard 2 or 3 times, but of course to get healthy, we can't work out once or twice. We have to do so consistently, year after year. Diets don't work because they're temporary, right? It's, I want to fit into that dress, or I want to get into that suit. And then what? If you go back to your old ways, your old habits, you're going to, bounce right back. To build a great relationship, right? You don't build a great relationship over saying, honey, I'm going to take you to an expensive dinner. That's stupid. That doesn't work. Great relationships are built over time, consistency, putting in the time, being fully present. A business, right? When you start a business, you don't do it in a weekend. You work on it consistently. You show up. You do the hard work that other people are not willing to do. So it's really all about consistency over intensity. But that consistency is not easy. And this is probably, if there's one piece of pushback I get from the book, is that people say it's hard, right? I didn't do it because it's difficult. And it's true. There are steps. Now, you don't have to do everything all at once, right? Sometimes it becomes overwhelming. So I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding that you have to, do every single thing in the book. No. Like, one of the first steps is to just plan one day. Part of the reason you hinted at this a little bit earlier, part of the reason that we find that vision boards and 10-year plans don't work is that they're a lot of effort, right? I don't know what I want to do in 10 years. I don't know my life mission. I don't know my values. It's hard, right? So as opposed to doing something that's so far out in the future, we start with tomorrow, right? Just start with tomorrow. By looking at our values. What are values? Values are attributes of the person you want to become. Values are attributes of the person you want to become. So we ask ourselves, how would the person I want to become spend their time tomorrow? And I divide this into 3 life domains. You are at the center of these 3 life domains. If you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of others, you can't make the world better. So you ask yourself, how would the person I want to become spend time taking care of themselves, right? We all know how important sleep is. We tell our children, you have to have a bedtime because it's important for your brain development. But do we have a bedtime? No, we're hypocrites, right? You got to put that time on your schedule, just like you would tell your kids to have a bedtime. You got to have a bedtime. If reading is one of your values, if growth is important to you, do you have that on your schedule? If exercise, if proper nutrition, if video games are important to you, if that's part of your values, great, got to be on your schedule. Then relationships. Part of the reason we have such a problem with loneliness in the industrialized world is that people don't plan time for relationships. It used to be people had the church group, they had the Kiwanis Club, they had the bowling league. Those institutions are dying. We don't have those regular occasions on our calendar. We've got to bring that time back. And then finally, your work domain, right? So there's 2 kinds of work. We have reactive work and we have reflective work. Reactive work is reacting to stuff. This is how low performers spend the time. They spend it reacting to emails, reacting to notifications, reacting to messages, reacting all day long. High performers make time for reflective work, right? They sit down to plan, to strategize, to think. And that kind of work can only be done without distraction. So that's what we do. We plan our next step by planning our day tomorrow, by making these trade-offs. And this is why time boxing is so much better than to-do lists, because when you time box, you have to make trade-offs. That part of the problem with to-do lists, this is why I hate to-do lists, is that there's no constraint. You can always add more. Whereas a time box calendar, on the other hand, forces you to make trade-offs, forces you to understand that you only have 24 hours in a day. And so that's one of the many reasons that to-do lists suck as a productivity tool, and time boxing is so much better.
I think you've really covered so much of what is in the book, but honestly, I would really encourage people to read it.
Thank you.
And just to reflect on. Look, you don't have to thank me. I'm thanking you, because honestly, I have followed a lot of people in my life, and you have really inspired me. Even if I tried to explain it, I don't think it would do it justice in terms of the impact that you've had on me, and then the impact that's had on everybody else has been massive. And I just can't thank you enough. And I love what you said. There's 2 things. I love what you said there right at the end there about values. When we look at ancient wisdom and we look at the work of, Seligman, about those virtues around, it takes courage, like you said. And it is hard sometimes to get started. And and justice, standing up for your rights, the rights of others, wisdom of what we have learned, and also that whole thing, the biggest one, which is why I love your work, which is about that temperance thing, that self-control. That's it. That's where the magic is. Even in the Lord's Prayer, lead us not into temptation, or Adam and Eve, don't eat fruit from the forbidden tree. There's distraction everywhere. But the greatest thing is the traction. And children have that naturally. They do have the traction. There's something that they want to do. Mm-hmm. And you inspire me to continue to do what I'm doing. And I'm really grateful to you. And we'll put the show in the show notes. We'll put the links to the books. I actually bought Hooked yesterday because I've listened to it. Oh, but I bought the book on Amazon because I want to actually have a physical copy of it. But Nir, thank you so much. So people going to your website, right, is a good place to start. And I see you've got a free course on there as well.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Absolutely. So if you go to Indestructible.com, that's the book website, and that's spelled I-N, the word distract, A-B-L-E. So Indestructible. There's actually a free 80-page workbook that we couldn't fit to the final edition of the book, so it's yours for free. It doesn't matter if you buy the book or not. So you can pick that up at Indestructible.com. And to follow me in my writing and my next project, then go to nirandfar.com. And Nir, again, is spelled like my first name, N-I-R, nirandfar.com.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And I know you're going to have a family dinner now, and I'm sure you'll be very present and not giving in to distraction.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, Nir. We really appreciate you. Wish you a happy, healthy, beautiful day. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Great talking to you.